He stepped onto the field, clutching the ball like it was part of his very being, only to face the fury of a man who judged him by the color of his skin rather than his talent. The coach threw him off with scorn, unaware that this teenager wasn't just a player. He was the son of a man about to turn their world upside down. The humiliation was caught on camera, sparking outrage online as some demanded justice, while others tried to crush his spirit. What happened next stunned even those who thought they'd seen it all. But let's start at the beginning. The sun blazed over White Oak High School's football field, casting long shadows across the manicured grass. The players were deep into their afternoon drills when a new figure stepped onto the field. It was 17-year-old Jamal Williams, tall and athletic, with an air of quiet confidence that instantly drew attention. The ball in his hands seemed like an extension of himself, effortlessly under control as he walked toward the group. Head coach Bradley Harper, a no-nonsense man in his mid-40s with a reputation for running his team like a military operation, spotted Jamal immediately. Harper's lips tightened into a thin line. To him, an unannounced arrival on his field was not just an intrusion. It was a challenge to his authority. "What are you doing here?" Harper's voice was sharp, slicing through the chatter of the players. It demanded attention, and it got it. "My name's Jamal Williams," the young man replied calmly, his voice steady as he met Harper's cold stare. "I'm your new striker." Harper snorted, his disdain evident. "On my field, you're nobody. Get off." The players froze, eyes darting between the newcomer and their coach. Jamal didn't move a muscle, standing firm under Harper's glare. Then, instead of leaving, he took a step forward, set the ball down, and launched into a spontaneous display of skill. He weaved the ball between three defenders with the kind of agility that turned heads, before sending it soaring into the top corner of the goal with a precision that left the goalkeeper flat-footed. "Not bad for a nobody," one of the senior players murmured, barely audible but enough to make Harper's face darken with fury. Harper stormed over, his temper boiling over. As Jamal lined up for another attempt, the coach stepped in and shoved him in the shoulder, forcing him off balance. "I said get off my field!" Harper barked, his voice echoing across the silent pitch. Jamal's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Instead, he bent down, unfastened his cleats, and placed them neatly at the edge of the field. Without a word, he walked away, his back straight and his head held high. His exit was quiet, but the tension it left behind was anything but. Unbeknownst to Harper, a few of the players had been recording the entire scene on their phones, catching every word and every shove. Within minutes, whispers started spreading, and by the time Jamal disappeared into the locker room, the footage was already on its way to social media. The storm brewing in the quiet suburbs of White Oak High was about to become much bigger than Harper could have ever anticipated. As Jamal walked away from the field, his cleats still in his hand, he pulled out his phone and dialed his father, Richard Williams. His voice was steady, but the bitterness in his words betrayed the sting of what had just happened. "You were right, Dad. They don't want people like me here," Jamal said, his tone tinged with both anger and disappointment. There was a pause on the other end before Richard's deep, measured voice came through. "No, son. You're wrong. They're about to find out exactly who we are." Richard Williams wasn't just any father. A sharp-minded businessman with a keen eye for opportunity, he had recently acquired a controlling stake in White Oak High's affiliated football club. But Richard wasn't the kind of man to flaunt his power. He had deliberately kept his ownership under wraps, preferring that Jamal earn his place on the team through sheer talent, not his father's influence. Now, however, it seemed the time for quiet observation was over. The next morning, Richard walked into White Oak High with a purpose. Standing over 6 feet tall in a flawlessly tailored suit, he exuded a commanding presence that turned heads in the front office. His dark eyes scanned the room as he spoke to the secretary with an air of authority that brooked no argument. "I'm here to see Principal Donovan," he said. Within minutes, Richard was ushered into the principal's office. Donovan, a mild-mannered man in his 50s, greeted him with a polite smile, unaware of the storm brewing behind Richard's calm demeanor. "I'd like to discuss the incident on the football field yesterday," Richard began, his voice steady but firm. "Is it normal for your coach to dismiss players based on the color of their skin?" Donovan's smile faltered, replaced by confusion and then unease. "I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. I'm not sure I understand." "You will," Richard said curtly. "Bring Coach Harper in here, now." When Harper arrived, he looked irritated, assuming this was another mundane administrative matter. But his expression shifted the moment he saw Richard, who exuded an intensity that Harper couldn't ignore. "This young man doesn't follow the rules," Harper began defensively. "I was simply maintaining discipline on my field." Richard's gaze hardened. "Discipline? Kicking a player off the field for no reason other than your prejudice is not discipline. It's discrimination." Harper's face flushed, but he held his ground. "I don't care who he is. If someone doesn't respect the process, they don't belong here." Richard's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "You don't care who he is? Well, let me enlighten you. That was my son, and I care very much about how he's treated." The weight of Richard's words hung in the air, leaving both Donovan and Harper scrambling for a response. It seemed like the issue might be resolved swiftly, but by that evening, things had taken an unexpected turn. The video of Harper shoving Jamal and ordering him off the field had gone viral, racking up hundreds of thousands of views. Social media erupted with outrage. The hashtags #JusticeForJamal and #racism in sports trending nationwide. News outlets picked up the story, and soon what had started as a local controversy became a national scandal. Commentators debated the incident on talk shows, activists called for Harper's resignation, and the school board faced mounting pressure to take action. By the end of the day, it was clear to everyone involved. This was no longer just about Jamal and Harper. It was about a system that allowed such behavior to go unchecked, and a family determined to change that. By the next morning, the halls of White Oak High were buzzing with excitement, tension, and whispered conversations. Students huddled in groups, their phones lighting up with notifications as the viral video from the previous day continued to spread like wildfire. The caption on most posts read, "Racism on the field, white coach versus black striker." The video was damning. It showed Coach Harper's outburst, his shove, and his sharp, dismissive words. It was impossible to ignore the undertone of prejudice that hung over the scene. Even those who had initially defended Harper now found themselves questioning his motives. In the administrative office, Harper paced nervously in front of Principal Donovan's desk, his usual air of confidence replaced by frustration and unease. "What now?" Harper demanded, his voice tinged with irritation and fear. Donovan sighed, his hands clasped tightly on the desk. "Now?" he repeated, looking Harper straight in the eye. "Now you fix this mess, or you'll lose your job. And frankly, even that might not be enough." Meanwhile, Richard Williams wasn't wasting time. By mid-morning, he had organized a press conference at a local community center. Cameras flashed as reporters crowded into the small space, eager for a statement. Richard, dressed in a sharp gray suit, stood at the podium with a calm yet commanding presence. "This isn't just about my son," Richard began, his deep voice resonating in the room. "This is about a pattern of systemic racism that has no place in our schools, our sports, or our society. My son Jamal is just one of many young black athletes who have faced this kind of treatment, and it ends here." The crowd murmured in agreement as Richard outlined his plan to conduct a full audit of the football program and the coaching staff. He emphasized the need for accountability and systemic change, promising to use his position as a club owner to ensure that no other player would experience what Jamal had. As Richard spoke, Jamal watched the live broadcast from home. Until now, he had stayed out of the spotlight, letting his father take the lead. But the viral video had made him the face of the controversy. His phone buzzed constantly with messages, some from classmates offering support, others filled with hateful comments and racial slurs. The contrast was stark and overwhelming. "You okay?" Richard asked when he returned home that evening. Jamal nodded, but didn't look up from his phone. "I'm fine, Dad. Just a lot to take in." Meanwhile, Coach Harper was scrambling to defend himself. Feeling the heat from the school board and public outrage, he gave an interview to a local news station, trying to control the narrative. "I'm not a racist," Harper declared, his expression a mix of defiance and desperation. "I'm a coach. My job is to maintain discipline and push my players to be their best. I don't care about race, only about results." But his words only added fuel to the fire. Shortly after the interview aired, old videos and testimonies from former players began surfacing on social media. In one clip, Harper could be heard berating an African-American player, using thinly veiled racial insults under the guise of motivation. In another, he dismissed a black player's complaint about unfair treatment, laughing it off as just how the game works. The backlash was immediate. Hashtags like #FireCoach. Harper and #racism in sports began trending, and prominent figures in the sports world weighed in, condemning Harper's actions and calling for his resignation. Harper's attempts to spin the situation in his favor were crumbling under the weight of his own history. And as the media frenzy grew, it became clear that this was no longer just a story about one coach and one player. It was a flashpoint in a much larger conversation about race, power, and accountability in sports. The day of the big game arrived, and the air around White Oak High's stadium was electric. This wasn't just any match. It was the season-defining game, one that could propel the team to the regional championships. The stands were packed with students, parents, and community members, all abuzz with speculation about whether Jamal Williams would play. As Jamal entered the stadium alongside his father, Richard Williams, a ripple of whispers and glances swept through the crowd. Some stared in awe, others in curiosity, and a few in veiled hostility. Jamal held his head high, refusing to let the weight of the moment bow his shoulders. His father walked beside him, exuding the same quiet determination that had carried him through countless boardrooms and battles of his own. As the team warmed up on the field, Richard approached Coach Harper, who stood stiffly near the sideline, clipboard in hand. Harper's usual stern confidence had been replaced by a visible tension. The scrutiny from the crowd and the media was palpable. "Coach Harper," Richard said, his voice steady and loud enough to carry to the nearby players and spectators. "You have an opportunity here to show that you're the leader this team and this community deserves. Put my son in the game." Harper hesitated, his jaw tightening. He knew that every decision he made today would be dissected by everyone watching. The viral scandal had put his career on the line, and the pressure to act was suffocating. With a reluctant nod, he turned to his assistant coach. "Get Williams suited up," he muttered, barely audible. When Jamal emerged from the locker room in his uniform, the crowd erupted in cheers. The sound of support was overwhelming, and for the first time since the incident, Jamal felt a surge of pride and validation. He jogged onto the field, greeted by teammates who, despite the tension of the past week, were genuinely glad to have him. The whistle blew, and the game began. From the moment Jamal touched the ball, it was clear he was a game changer. His first goal came within 10 minutes, a stunning strike from outside the penalty box that left the opposing goalkeeper rooted to the spot. The crowd exploded, chanting his name. By the 20-minute mark, Jamal had scored again, this time weaving through 3 defenders with an agility and precision that left the audience breathless. Harper, watching from the sidelines, could no longer deny the talent he had tried so hard to dismiss. As the game progressed, the team fed off Jamal's energy, and their performance soared. By the final whistle, White Oak had secured a decisive victory, 4-1. The players hoisted Jamal onto their shoulders, celebrating the boy who had not only saved their season, but had also become the symbol of resilience and justice. After the game, Harper approached Jamal. The crowd quieted as they watched the interaction, the weight of the moment not lost on anyone. Harper extended his hand, his expression a mixture of humility and regret. "You're a hell of a player," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong." Jamal shook Harper's hand firmly, but his response carried a message meant for everyone within earshot. "It's not just about me, Coach," Jamal said, his voice steady and clear. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did." The crowd erupted in applause, many standing to show their support. It was a moment of triumph, not just for Jamal, but for a community that had witnessed the power of standing up against injustice. In the weeks that followed, changes began to ripple through White Oak High. Harper kept his job, but only after agreeing to undergo extensive bias training and committing to fostering a more inclusive environment for his players. The school's administration implemented new policies to address discrimination and ensure accountability at every level. As for Jamal, he became a local hero. His story spread beyond the school, inspiring conversations about race and equality in sports. He continued to play with the same fire and determination, but now he also carried the mantle of an advocate, a young man who had turned his pain into purpose. For Jamal, the victory on the field was just the beginning. He had proven his worth, not just as an athlete, but as a force for change. And while the battle wasn't over, he knew he wasn't fighting alone.